So we will go ahead and get going. Thank you all so much for being here. And if you're not muted right now, please go ahead and take the time to mute yourself. And I've already mentioned we are recording this presentation and it will be added to our YouTube channel. You can find our videos and art and horticulture activities at dixon.org on the Dixon at Home page on our website. And you can go up to the little YouTube icon and click on that and find all kinds of other videos too. And during the talk, when a question pops into your head, like it invariably will, go ahead and scroll down to the bottom of your screen and click on the chat little icon and just type in your question. And in the end, Kevin will answer your questions. And normally I don't do a long introduction for Kevin because he prefers it that way. But this time I told him I would be happy to give him a real introduction if he would like that. And then he suggested I give him a surreal introduction. So I'll start off that way. Kevin Sharp, the Since Been Time Museum and Director, 2007, has museum originated many great exhibitions, and our permanent collection has seen incredible growth through purchases and generous gifts, such as the John and Susan Horseman gift. And the Dixon has also physically expanded with the addition of the Liz and Tommy Farnsworth Education Building. And so all of these wonderful things have happened under the leadership of Kevin Sharp. So I will let him take it away from here.
Well, thank you, Lindley. That wasn't too painful. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. Do we share our screen now, Lindley, or?
Yes, go ahead and share your screen.
All right. All this technical stuff, Amanda, all this technical stuff just completely befuddles me. I'm going to get to you in a bit. I've got this weird Zoom screen, Lindley. Are you seeing my PowerPoint at this point? Lindley?
We see it.
Okay, perfect. And then I'm supposed to do something else. Lindley, you might tell me what the next step is. I forget.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Everything got covered up at the bottom of my screen for some reason.
I know. All right.
And it wasn't formatted like usual. So go to slideshow.
That's it.
Perfect.
And from the beginning.
From beginning.
That's a relief. Man, I was feeling the pressure there. Okay. So this is a talk called "The Durability of American Impressionism," and it's based on an essay I have written for the catalog to the next show that we were doing that will open at the Dixon in January. It's a show called "America's Impressionism: Echoes of a Revolution," and the show we were originally going to be the third venue for the show, but with all the crazy coronavirus stuff, we are now the first venue, and the second venue is the San Antonio Museum of Art, and the third venue is the Brandywine River Museum. And particularly Amanda Burden, who I was chatting with a little earlier, is the primary curator of the show and the primary author and general editor of the catalog. And so one of the upsides to this virtual world where we are living in is that Amanda gets to take part in something like Munch and Learn, which probably under normal circumstances she wouldn't get on a plane and fly to Memphis to see a Munch and Learn. She will also be giving the opening lecture when the show opens on January 24th. So it's really, we have Amanda to thank for or to blame for this Munch and Learn. It is when we signed on to be part of the project. I asked Amanda if I could contribute an essay to the catalog. I had an idea for about what I wanted to write. I have always thought that Americans sort of wrang more aesthetic value out of Impressionism than even the French did. That that Impressionism has a much longer vanguard shelf life in the United States than in French. Now, of course, there would be no American Impressionism without French Impressionism. But like I said, there's a real durability. I mean, artists are continuing to make significant works of art in the Impressionist idiom as late as the post-war years. This is Frank Benson. He is, a classic American Impressionist painter. He's a member of the 10. He was probably the youngest member of the 10, but he's born 12 years before the first French Impressionist exhibition in 1874, and he lives until 1951. So he dies 6 years before I'm born. So I mean, that's kind of a spectacular stretch of time. And here's an example from a watercolor by Benson that he made in 1946 when he was 84 years old. But that's kind of what I'm talking about in terms of the shelf life and the durability of American Impressionism. We'll get to, and as you noticed on the title of the talk, this is part 1. I'm going to do part 2 sometime, I don't know, I think in February. And we will actually get to artists like Benson in that talk. So mark your calendars. So 1874, this is the year that Impressionism makes its kind of first public expression, when the first Impressionist exhibition occurs. This is like the coming out party year for Impressionism. And of course, that they weren't Impressionists in 1874. It was only when Monet shows Impression Sunrise, a painting that he made in 1872 that's now in the collection of the Musée Marmottan Monet in Paris, and the critic Louis Leroy basically names the entire movement, Impressionism, based on this one painting. Now there were, of course, exhibitions in 1876 and a third one in 1877, but realized that the first Impressionist exhibition in 1874 was so wildly unsuccessful in many respects that the group completely disbanded. This group called the Société Anonyme. It's like, this didn't work, we're not doing it again, it's over. So they disband in late 1874, and nothing happens in 75. So when they return in 1876, I mean, it's really just out of desperation mostly. They've got no better options. The French economy is not good. Their work is not selling any better than it ever has. They're not getting any attention. So they band together again at the end of 1875 and put on an 1876 show. And that exhibition is important to the story of American Impressionism because it's the first show that we know an American saw, or as far as I know. I mean, an American may have seen the 1874 exhibition. It's entirely possible, but I've never been able to find any documentation of that happening. But we know that Henry James saw the 1876 show because he reviewed it in the New York Daily Tribune. At this point, Henry James is just barely Henry James. He's published Roderick Hudson, and that's about it at this point. He moves to Paris. He's living in the Latin Quarter in 1875, and he writes, and he's doing journalism. He writes a review for the New York Daily Tribune called Parisian Festivity, and the very opening salvo of that review, he says, an exhibition for which I may at least claim that it can give rise, at any rate in my own mind, to no dangerous perversities of taste, is that of the little group of irreconcilables. Now that could actually have been a really good name for them too, otherwise known as the Impressionists in painting. Now he goes on to, he's got some issues with, with the new painting, with Impressionism. He thinks it's a kind of a cult of ugliness. He doesn't have very good things to say about it. He compares it to the English pre-Raphaelites, not favorably though. And but he sees the show, he writes about it, and it's, to the best of my knowledge, he's the first American to really take it in. In 1877, we know that 2 Americans see that third show. The first is George A. Lucas, not the guy that made Star Wars, but a Baltimore man who settles in Paris when he's about 30 years old and lives this fascinating life as an art advisor to wealthy American collectors, most notably the Walters of Baltimore. And the collection of the Walters Museum is largely due to the efforts of George A. Lucas. And as you can see, he was also a friend of James McNeill Whistler, who painted this little portrait sketch of him a few years later in 1886. But we know that Lucas saw the 1877 show because George A. Lucas, kept incredible diaries. Now they're incredible for a few reasons. One, because he kept them, he wrote something in it every day for about 50 years. I mean, every single day. And they're also remarkable because they are the most boring entries you have ever read in your life. I mean, this book is easily, this thick, with an index that's as thick as our American Impressionism catalog. But it can be very useful for tracking where Lucas was and who he was with on any given day. And given that Lucas is really critical to the story of America's embrace of European art in the 19th century, it's actually a very good thing to have. And I'm going to share with you his diary entry from April 10th, 1877. He writes in a kind of shorthand, which I've spelled out for you. It's Tuesday, April 10th, 1877, 6 douche, preceded by vapor bath. Now realize that the word douche is French for shower, and showers were not something that was available to people in the 19th century. Really, showers don't come into people's homes until really the turn of the 20th century. But you could go to places and get these needle baths, as they were called, and Lucas always was having some kind. The one consistent thing throughout the diaries is that he seems to never feel good for the whole of the 19th century. And so he goes and gets a vapor bath, and then he goes to Hotel Drouot, the auction house, and then he visits an exhibition, Impressionistes. That's not quite spelled like the English spell it and not quite spelled like the French spell it, but it's clear that he attended. And then he goes to Marcel Potier's, who's an art packer, and then to Adolf Schreier's, who is a German-born painter. And he notes that at the end of the night, he had a headache. So we know Lucas goes to the 1877 Impressionist Exhibition. And as any of you who have attended any Impressionist-related Munch and Learn of mine, I always fit in poor J. Alden Weir, who, and here's a photograph of him in 1925. He's in his 20s. He's studying at the École des Beaux-Arts, and he with Jean-Léon Gérôme, and he's a very diligent student. He's from a family of artists. His father is the drawing master at the United States Military Academy in West Point, and his brother John, or his stepbrother John Ferguson, or half brother John Ferguson Weir, will found the art department at Yale College eventually. And so Weir is a young student in the academy. He's soaking it all up, and he's a very well-trained young academic painter with a lot of promise. And he writes a letter to his parents. He's in Paris. He writes to them back in New York on the 15th of April. So he could be the third person to have seen an Impressionist exhibition. He says to them, I went across the river the other day to see an exhibition of the work of a new school, which called themselves Impressionists. Now, I've made fun of him for years for calling them the Impressionists. But you know what? Only as I was working on my essay for Amanda's catalog did I find an actual review of the show in which a critic called them Impressionists. So I've been mocking this guy for close to 30 years, unfairly, apparently. So anyway, I never in my life saw more horrible things. I understand that they are mostly all rich, which accounts for so much talk. They do not observe drawing nor form, but give you an impression of what they call nature. It was worse than a chamber of horrors. I was there about a quarter of an hour and left with a headache. So interestingly enough, Henry James says, well, it's awful stuff, but it won't do you any harm. But note that both George A. Lucas and J. Alden Weir both had headaches after seeing an Impressionist exhibition. So it's possible that it was kind of dangerous stuff. And so here's the show that gave Lucas a headache and young J. Alden Weir found so appalling. It was the 1877 Impressionist Exhibition. Excuse me a moment. That many scholars, probably most notably Rick Britell, considered to be the best of the 8 Impressionist exhibitions. The 1877 show, they're all still in the group. This is an exhibition that Gustav Caillebotte organizes and bankrolls, essentially. So when Weir says they're all rich, they're not all rich, but Caillebotte is. Caillebotte's plenty rich. And in 1877, he shows this painting, Paris Street, Rainy Day. The whole reason the 77 show had to occur in Caillebotte's view is so he could present this painting in that particular context. That show was also the exhibition that Renoir shows, The Ball of the Moulin de la Galette, a masterpiece. And it's also the same show that Monet shows his series of paintings of the Gare Saint-Lazare. And Pizarro shows wonderful things. Sisley shows wonderful things. You can definitely make the case that that this is the pinnacle of Impressionist exhibitions. Degas shows his brothel monotypes, which are just mind blowing in their incongruity. It is a masterpiece, but it gave Lucas and Weir headaches. Another American who might have seen the 1877 show, we think for sure she meets Degas in 1877, is Mary Cassatt. But we don't know that she went. We don't know exactly when in 1877 she meets Edgar Degas. It could have been after. There's just no Mary Cassatt, I did a fair amount of work on Mary Cassatt, is absolutely maddening in her reticence. Whereas Lucas tells you everything, Mary Cassatt tells you almost nothing. And, most of the information we have about her, the primary documents we have, are in spite of her, not because of her. She burned all her letters. It's crazy making, but she could have seen it. Certainly, Degas had brought her into the Impressionist circle by 1878, and there were plans for an exhibition in 78 that actually just fell through. And we know from Cassatt that from a letter she writes to Ambrose Vollard that she can't destroy, and Vollard saves in 1903 when she sells Vollard this very painting, that Degas helped her with this painting, that he may have even worked on it a little bit. and she included it, of course, in the 1879 exhibition, which we know she saw because she was in it. And thanks to Mary Cassatt, and the 1879 Impressionist Exhibition was really Degas' show, and where he tries to create this sense of internal unity and build a following of artists. I mean, at this point, if you saw my last Munch and Learn, you know that at this point, by 1879, there's a real rupture between the landscapists of the Impressionist school and Degas and his group of followers. So at this point, Degas is trying to build his ranks, and he builds it absolutely brilliantly. And in 1879, he's showing the dancer on the stage. Our good friend Jean-Louis Forain is showing the dancers in the wings, being ogled by old men with monocles or pince-nez, and Mary Cassatt is showing young debutantes in the loge, watching the performance, or maybe watching others in the audience. This is just a kind of brilliant synchronicity that's going on here that I know was absolutely intended. So now at this point you may be asking, and thanks to Mary Cassatt, who will take part in the 1879, 1880, 1881, and 1886 Impressionist exhibitions. So the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, and the 8th. Thanks to Mary Cassatt, there's an American in all of those shows. She will be the only American. So you can make the argument that French Impressionism, really almost from the midway point at least, is very much a kind of international endeavor, and largely because of Mary Cassatt. So, but you may be asking, where's the American Impressionism we were promised? Well, if 1874, if that first French Impressionist exhibition in Paris in 1874 was the Impressionist rupture, the first absolute attempt to move away from academic traditions. In the United States, that probably occurs in 1877. So just as the Impressionists had to contend with the much larger and much more powerful, much more established, much more prestigious salon in the United States, this photograph is from, or this wood engraving is from 1868. In the late 1860s, the National Academy of Design still had a kind of hegemony, a kind of control over the art world. We just had the For America show that comes from the National Academy of Design. The National Academy of Design still very much exists, but in the 1860s, in 1865 it turns 40 years old. And remember, it's founded by the Hudson River School generation and others as well, figure painters too, and genre painters. But after 40 years, it had become so large, really, that it's almost exclusionary in its way. There's only so much space in the National Academy of Design building, and it became more and more difficult. It became more and more difficult for younger painters to break in to that juried show. And it was frustrating. It was that, this was the place to be seen. You can see that Harper's Weekly is covers the exhibition. Many of the publications in New York covered the National Academy's annual shows, and they were places to see and be seen. And so in 1868, in that year in particular, you see people like Albert Bierstadt. So it's sort of the late incarnation of Hudson River School painting, who are presenting ever larger, ever more expansive canvases that are only just eating up more space. Plus, it's an aesthetic that we've been looking at this point for 30 years. And younger painters are beginning to look for new ways, let's say, to create expression in their work besides glorifying the landscape. And one of the artists who makes a tremendous difference is our good friend, J. Alden Weir. Here he is in Sargent's portrait. I love this portrait of him. It's a little later. But in 1877, he is among the artists who decide to do something about the National Academy of Design. And what they do is they form an organization called the Society of American Artists. Now, Weir is I kind of want to point to it with my finger like I normally do. I don't have a pointer, I don't think. But anyway, if you look in the left-hand column below the officers on the left-hand page, you'll see J. Alden Weir right there among the founders of the National Academy of Design, which they launch in 1877. Now, this will become, the Society of American Artists will become the home base of American Impressionism. At its founding, it really has nothing to do with Impressionism, but it does have something to do with younger artists seeking opportunities to show together and to present different styles. I mean, in many respects, the Society of American Artists are as dissimilar to one another as Monet and Degas are. You know, it's not an attempt to advance a movement, but eventually over time, within about 10, 15 years, the Society of American Artists will absolutely be equated with American Impressionism. And there are artists among the founders who will become American Impressionists, including our friend J. Alden Weir. Now, the other thing that happens in this moment that gets American Impressionism rolling and really advances Impressionism as a kind of international style, which it definitely becomes, is John Singer Sargent visits Claude Monet in Giverny in 1885. And this is Sargent's painting of Monet at work at his easel, painting en plein air, out in the along the edge of the woods. And in this moment, Sargent's still a young artist. He's barely 30 years old, if he's even 30 at this point. He's already been well recognized for his salon paintings, and he's a known entity. He's moved to London, but he's interested in the vanguard. He is interested in the work of Monet, and he goes and paints with them, and produces this sort of lovely artifact, in a way, of his interaction with Monet. And now Monet, more and more from this point forward, Monet will become the kind of the face of French Impressionism. And we'll get to more of that in a bit. But first, 1886. Here's where it all starts coming together. Here's where it starts flowing in a hurry, and things start running together. It is a watershed year. 1886 is for Impressionism as an international style. So Sargent goes to Broadway. Not in New York, Broadway in England, and spends time with an American painter that I like very much, that's not very well known anymore, named Frank Millet. And Millet is a wonderful, wonderful artist, but there's lots of Americans and English painters in Broadway in the summer of 1886, and Sargent is one of them. And in this moment, he's as much an Impressionist as he will ever be, and he paints this masterpiece that's now in the Tate called Lily, Lily, Carnation, Rose, and the lily and the rose are the two daughters of Frank Millet, and the second lily and the carnation are the flowers. So that happens in 1886. The other thing that happens in 1886 is the 8th and final Impressionist Exhibition occurs, and it's a lot of people have written about this particular show, and everybody brings their own personal bias to it. I think in the new painting catalog, I think Martha Ward, the scholar Martha Ward, writes the essay about the 1886 show, and she suggests that Degas and Pizarro were the primary organizers of it. But I truly believe that, and that could be true at some kind of fundamental level. But I also very much believe that Mary Cassatt was nobody advocated for it more vigorously than Mary Cassatt. She wanted this show to happen. She was far more invested. She had far more of her identity as an artist invested in the Impressionist experiment, although she would object to that particular wording, but just as a way of describing it, she was far more invested in it than Degas was at that point. And she also had the means, the financial means to support it. And I think she encouraged it more than is really recognized. So this eighth and final show is incredibly important, that a French Impressionist exhibition could have had an American, at least co-organizer, is kind of an interesting thing. The other thing you'll notice as you scan through these names are the names that are missing. And normally, if we were in the auditorium and I was walking around and talking to all of you, I would be asking you who was missing. But since I can't do that, I'll just tell you. You probably already noticed there's no Monet, there's no Renoir, there's no Caillebotte, there's no Sisley. But there are some names that we usually don't associate with Impressionism, like Lucien Pizarro, Camille Pizarro's son, Odeon Redon, Claude-Emile Schuffenecker, Georges Seurat, Signac. These are artists that mostly represent, a phase beyond Impressionism, and that is, and that's important too. That Impressionism isn't this static thing that's locked in time. Even the Impressionists, Degas, Monet, I would argue that they're not even Impressionist painters by the 1890s for one reason or another. And certainly Renoir is fully invested in his career as a salon painter by that point. And so, it's part of the reason I think that Impressionism has this healthy shelf life is because it's so mutable, it's so adaptable. You can do so many things with it. Now, the other thing that happens in 1886 is this man packs up 293 French Impressionist paintings and brings them to New York. Packs them up, I can't remember how many crates, it's known, but he just shoves these paintings in boxes and brings them to the United States. I think they have those 293 French Impressionist paintings have an aggregate value of less than $90,000. And that becomes an issue because Durand-Ruel pays no import duty to bring these paintings into the United States. And it makes American art dealers crazy because, people like Samuel Putnam Avery are buying things from George A. Lucas and bringing them to the United States to sell. And he's got to pay import duty, but Durand-Ruel is doing this as an exhibition, something to benefit the general public, and he escapes it somehow. Actually, he is bringing these works to sell too. He knows he's getting away with something and he's happy about it. And the show is, first of all, it takes place at the American something. I don't know. I can't remember the venue where he shows the work. But after that presentation is over, he's invited by, of all places, the National Academy of Design, and this was their building at that time, no longer exists, to show his work, to show those like 230 of those paintings there. So that it was, the exhibition, I wouldn't say was necessarily a complete success, a roaring success for Durand-Ruel, but it was good enough to make him see that there could be audiences for this in the United States. And he writes to the artist Henri de Fontaine-Latour from New York in May 1886. He says, "Don't take the Americans for savages. On the contrary, they are less ignorant and less hidebound than our French collectors. Paintings that took 20 years to gain acceptance in Paris met with great success here." Now he's exaggerating the success, but he feels like he has to, because the artists he represents, the Impressionists that he represents, are not entirely happy that he's trying to find an audience for their work in the United States. You know, because after all, we're savages. But Durand-Ruel considered his venture enough of a success that in 1887, the following year, he opens a branch of his gallery in New York on Fifth Avenue at 36th Street. And that's that the building you see on the corner, that is the Gallery Durand-Ruel. And this is an interior shot, and I love this shot for lots of reasons. It's got great stuff when you like to just walk into that little room. I mean, the painting on the far left, kind of sitting on an easel, is a Monet painting from Pourville that he made in 1882. I would guess the painting right in the center is probably a Corot. The painting just to the right of the Corot, the woman looking through a lorgnette, that's a Mary Cassatt painting from 1878 that's now in the collection of the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Just a masterpiece. So Durand-Ruel is going to plant a flag in New York, and that flag is going to wave well into the 1950s. The gallery will survive lots of, survive 2 world wars. It'll survive lots of things, and really be critical to creating an appreciation and an audience and a buying audience for works of Impressionism. Now, in 1887 or 1886, actually, another thing begins to happen. It may have even started earlier. Could have started as early as 1885. A young generation, a generation that's probably even younger than the artists who founded the Society of American Artists. These people right out of school are making their way to France and to study. And what they, some of them are trying to study at the École des Beaux-Arts. Some I think probably do, but what they not all, many of them find is Impressionism, because Impressionism is everywhere by the mid-1880s. And so I love this painting. It's Willard Metcalf. It's called The 10-Cent Breakfast. And I know it's painted, I'm almost certain it's painted in France. It could be actually painted in Giverny. But we don't know who this man is, but this is John Henry Twachman. I'm sorry. I know you can't see my cursor, can you? Can you see my cursor, Lindley?
Yes, we can.
You can? Oh, that's awesome. So thank you, Bill. We're not sure who this is. He may be the host, but this is John Henry Twachman, right here, who will become a very important American painter. This is Theodore Robinson, who will become one of the more important figures to settle in Giverny, or not settle, but to spend time in Giverny. And this is Robert Louis Stevenson, who is the subject, who John Singer Sargent also paints, and in kind of an Impressionist style. He's all obviously the famous writer, but his brother was at the time just as famous as an art critic. And so here you have this cluster of American painters. And I think this may be, that inscription at the bottom looks like it might be Giverny. So if it is, and it's 1887, a hotel opens in Giverny by a couple whose last name is Bodie. And that's where most of the American painters stay. So these American, mostly landscapists, and that landscape really is the primary focus of Amanda's exhibition that we'll be showing here starting in January. Landscape painting is really the motif that runs through the entirety of the exhibition. And there's a chapter written by Ross King in the catalog, and I just happen to have the catalog right here, about Monet's influence on American Impressionism. And it's really an inspired essay. And Monet is the artist they come to find. When Americans decide that no, they don't want to paint like Bouguereau or Jean-Léon Gérôme, they decide they want to paint like Monet. And so there's this beautiful earlier Monet painting of a poppy field near Argenteuil from 1873. It's now in the collection of the Musée d'Orsay. And look, here's Willard Metcalf's poppy field from 1886 that I think is still in a private collection, I believe. And it's not that, you know, Monet had a patent on poppy fields. I mean, they're picturesque. You see a poppy field in Europe, you want to be a painter too. But you know, there's also no question that they're looking at Monet and emulating him and trying to get to him to a certain extent. This is Giverny. This is the village of Giverny right here. I like this one a lot. The interesting thing about Monet and Giverny in 1886 and after is that Monet is painting anywhere but Giverny. You know, he lives there. You know, he's building gardens. He's building gardens in a house he doesn't even own yet, but his paintings are starting to sell, and he's making some money. So he's traveling. I mean, he's in 86, he's in Belle-Île up in Brittany. He's in the South at Antibes in 87 and 88. He's painting the Creuse River, the Petite Creuse River in 1889. He's not really painting Giverny that much. I mean, he does, but not a lot. He's still making these painting excursions that he finds central to his work. And so leave it to Theodore Wendell, a wonderful, wonderful artist who paints these flowering fields of Giverny in 1889. And get this, look at this, soak this up a minute. Okay, that's enough. Look what Monet's doing in 1890. Wendell in 89, Monet in 90. Now, it's probably unlikely that Monet saw Wendell's painting. If he did, it'd be a fluke, because by this point, Monet is trying to keep American painters away from him and away from his stepdaughters, and to which he's not entirely successful. But that, you know, it's almost like American landscape painters are almost like the paparazzi to Monet. It's not the same at all, but you know, he's just, at first he's flattered by their attention, but after a while it gets kind of tiresome because they keep coming, they keep returning year after year. And then here's another Willard Metcalf painting from 1887. I just think it's beautiful. I have no particular reason to show it to you, except that I think it's a very beautiful painting, and it's painted in Giverny in 1887. And then I mentioned Theodore Robinson, who was in the Willard Metcalf painting of the artist and writer eating breakfast. This is Robinson's view of Giverny. Now Robinson is one of the few American painters that Monet will indulge, that Monet lets get close to him. And he will be an important catalyst for advancing Monet's career in the United States. He writes about Monet. He's a wonderful painter, but he's also a gifted and insightful writer about art. And he writes a major article, I think in 1894, that contributes to the mania for Monet in the beginning in the 1890s. And of course, 1891, Monet's painting grain stacks, very famously. And same year, a little later in the year, so is John Leslie Brecht, an American artist. Well, we're actually doing a John Leslie Brecht exhibition that'll be here in the first slot of 2022, a show that's being organized by the Mint Museum in Charlotte. Brecht made about as many, probably not as many, but Brecht made a dozen paintings of grain stacks in different conditions of light. just as Monet. Monet made many more, but Brecht made plenty of them. And so did our friend Theodore Butler. This is actually in the Dixon's permanent collection, and it's from a bit later, but and it's a work that's in our American Impressionism exhibition. And Monet, I think, genuinely liked Theodore Robinson. I'm not sure that he was so crazy about Theodore Butler at first. This is Theodore Robinson's painting of Butler on his, this is Theodore, the artist Theodore Butler, whose work we just saw, on his wedding day in 1892 to Monet's stepdaughter, Suzanne Hochaday. So he was, as I said, he was not entirely successful in keeping the American artists away from the daughters of his longtime partner, Alice Hochaday. So 1886 and beyond were crucial years in the development of American Impressionism, absolutely. And 1893 will be the point where we stop today, but it is just as important, but in very different ways. So in 1893, the Society of American Artists moves into the Fine Arts Society building. This building was only completed in 1891. This building on 57th Street, in the wilds of 57th Street, will become home base for American Impressionism. This is where American Impressionist works are shown consistently. It's an important destination, and that 1893 show is the first show really in which the American Impressionists begin to seize control of the Society of American Artists. So 1893 is an important year. Now they meet resistance. There are the critics the American critics largely still hate Impressionism, and they sure don't trust Durand Ruel. But Durand Ruel doesn't really care because he's built a market already in the United States. And so they can say any evil thing they want to say about him, and it just bounces right off him. Now, American Impressionists don't have that same luxury. They need American art critics to support what they're doing, and it's a hard-won battle. Now, the other thing that happens in 1893 is the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. This World's Fair is many things, but the one thing that it absolutely is the coming out party for Impressionism in the United States. American Impressionist painters show their work here. They actually, it has the Columbian Exposition. The Columbian Exposition has an important advocate in Bertha Palmer, who was one of the primary organizers of the fair, had a crucial role in it. And Bertha Palmer, the wife of Potter Palmer, the hotel magnate in Chicago, in 1891, this woman bought 8 paintings by Monet. And between 1891 and 1900, she'll buy 30 more. And so this is why Durand Ruel, and she's not the only one buying Monet, and this is why Durand Ruel can sort of scoff at what the critics are saying about Impressionism. Important advocate. And so American, hang on a second, I'm gonna turn this off. American painters not only show their work at the Columbian Exposition, a number of them go to the Columbian Exposition and paint the fair. Here's our friend Theodore Robinson, once again, who paints the Wedding March, who paints Giverny. He paints the World's Fair. This painting's now in Crystal Bridges' collection. So does Childe Hassam, another really critical figure in the story of American Impressionism. And none other than our own Mary Cassatt paints this mural in the end wall of the women's building of the Columbian Exposition. It's called Modern Woman. And it is, so Impressionism has this moment in 1893 where it becomes very much a legitimate thing in a way. And but not everybody likes it, including the critic William Howe Downs, who's actually writing a year earlier in New England Magazine. And he says, almost all the Impressionist paintings brought to the United States thus far have been imported by a certain dealer whose principal shops are in Paris and New York. The other picture dealers here have received them from him and have made such a market for them as was possible. Very soon, a considerable number of American artists began to manifest marked symptoms of sympathy for the purple mania and a tendency to noisy effects which the Impressionists produce in their mistaken attempts at brilliancy. And then he concludes, Impressionism is a fad. Well, obviously, William Howe Downs couldn't be more incorrect. His characterization of Impressionism as the purple mania may be based somewhat in truth, but you know what? That purple looks really good on canvas, and we will get to sometime in February. We will do the second part of this talk where we get to the issue of durability and the longevity of Impressionism. But for now, we'll stop right here, and I will just say thank you and stay tuned for part 2 coming in February.
Well,
Bravo.
thank you very much. Yes, bravo. Thank you very much, Kevin. We do have a few questions. Let's see. I have to get to the questions. People have nice comments and everything. Okay, so many people hated Impressionism at first, and then basically throughout the time it was made. And so what finally in France, what finally sort of made it break through that hatred?
Well, you know, probably a lot of things. But you know, I mean, I think that word durability is an important one. I mean, these artists just persevered. They believed in their aesthetic, and they kept at it. And you know, Paul Durand-Ruel's role, you know, I mean, he was very unreliable in some ways in his support, not because he wanted to be unreliable, but because, you know, the French economy kept blowing up in the 1870s and the 1880s. And, you know, when Durand-Ruel brought those 293 paintings to the United States, he was very, very close to bankrupt. You know, what he says to Fontaine-Latour, he really means. You know, he's been trying to sell Impressionism to the French for 20 years, and they're just not buying in a way that, you know, that he needs them to. And so he organizes exhibitions in London, in Brussels, in Berlin, in Boston, and in the 1880s. I mean, he's as desperate as the French Impressionists are, but you know, he's supportive enough, you know, at key moments that they just keep going. And I'll also say this, you know, American collectors and American artists are really critical to this story as well. Because I mean, when painters like Willard Metcalf and Theo Wendell and Theodore Robinson and Theodore Butler and others start making their way to France to paint like Monet, I mean, that's a kind of legitimacy that matters in a way. And so, plus you have this whole second generation of artists who show up in the 8th and final Impressionist exhibition. Now, you know, they're post-impressionists, they're neo-impressionists, they're not, you know, like Redon, he's not impressionist at all. He's a completely different flavor. Gauguin is moving in a different direction as well. But it can all be traced back to the Impressionist experiment in one form or another. And even the act of rebellion that characterizes their work, that search for independence from the stultifying effects of the academic system, created a kind of a model that began to gain currency in France in the 1880s, and that American artists absolutely emulated. I mean, I don't know that much about the Society of American Artists or its formation. Amanda, you might weigh in on this as well. But I have to believe that artists like St. Gaudens, the sculptor Augustus St. Gaudens, and Louis Comfort Tiffany, but he was a painter at that point, and Helena Decay, and other of the key founders of the Society of American Artists, I'm betting they're aware of the Impressionist schism, and that it has some influence on their decision to break off from the National Academy of Design. Amanda, why don't you pop in?
Hi, okay, sure, here I am.
Great to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. I literally had my lunch during your lunch and learn, your munch and learn. So it's perfect. Yeah, I think one of the things to answer that question would be also to think about, you mentioned the influence of other artists, but you also mentioned the influence of collectors. And when those new moneyed Americans started throwing their cash around, Bertha Potter Palmer or all the friends of Mary Cassatt, the Havemeyers, that really set, I mean, maybe that critic wasn't so wrong in saying it's a fad, but it was a fad that became a fashion, that became a timeless style, to look at it in sartorial terms. I think that the sticking around, the durability, as you say, is really so many more factors than just what the critics had to say.
Yeah, you make a really good point. And the thing, in some ways, Durand Durrell also got very lucky. I mean, his timing, in the 1870s was unbelievably bad. But his timing in the last half of the 1880s was spectacularly good. He goes in 1886. He opens his gallery in 87. He becomes a known quantity to American collectors. And then in 1889, it's the World's Fair in Paris, and all those Americans are there. And they're looking to buy themselves some culture. So yeah, that's a really good point, Amanda.
Well, thank you both very much. And Amanda put in the chat that Metcalf painting that you showed, Kevin, is in a private collection, but it is also in the upcoming exhibition. And
That's
so
right.
we'll be excited about that. That would be an amazing painting to see.
Yeah.
And then another question, did any of the French Impressionists visit the United States?
Yes. Two, well, actually three, if you count Mary Cassatt. Degas very famously comes to the United States in 1873 to visit family in New Orleans. He and his brother. And I mean, Impressionism, actually, maybe it's 1872. Impressionism hasn't really, it is. He comes in 1872 and he stays till early 1873. Impressionism isn't really a thing yet, but he comes. The other artist that comes to the United States, and maybe there are more, but these are the ones I know, is Jean-Francoise Rafaeli, who is a very contentious figure in the French Impressionist circle. Monet, Renoir, Gauguin absolutely hate him. They think he's a hack, and they want him. They want Degas, and Degas brings Rafaeli into the mix. And when the two branches of Impressionism, Degas circle and the landscapists, have their schism in 81, 82, it's because Degas won't throw Rafaeli under the bus. Now, Rafaeli's not a bad painter at all. I really don't understand it. but he makes a couple of very famous tours of the United States in the 1890s and early 20th century, and lectures, and has major show at the Art Institute of Chicago, and he does a thing with I think he's a judge of the Carnegie International, and so he's definitely there. And then Mary Cassatt, was famous for, well, she wasn't famous for it, but she famously had terrible seasickness, and so she goes like 25 years without coming back to the United States. But in the late 1890s, she finally makes a trip to her home country. So, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. And so another good question is, what happened to that Mary Cassatt mural that was in the Women's Building?
I looked and looked and looked and looked for it. When we did the Cassatt retrospective in '98, I mean, we had the World's Fair archives, at our fingertips, and I can't tell you how many hours I wasted trying to. I finally found some. We tracked it somewhere from the fair. I can't remember exactly where, but we assume it just got pitched at some point. It's a big hunk of canvas, and somebody probably got tired of storing it. I think we tracked it to a storage facility somewhere just outside of Chicago, and but we could never find it, sadly.
So much of the things that were made for the old world fairs were just made to be temporary, and it's so heartbreaking to see all the things that were destroyed from them.
It was not her greatest work. She was an easel painter. That doesn't necessarily translate to mural scale. It was perfectly fine. We do have better photographs of it than the one I showed you, and they're very nice kind of wood engraving reproductions of it. But we're probably better off focusing on her pastels and easel paintings, because those were a real achievement. But she worked hard on that mural. It was a huge undertaking for her.
We have one last question. It seems like a good one to wrap things up. And the question is, where is the market for Impressionism today? And so where is the biggest market, and is there a specific place in the United States that is a good market for Impressionism? Well,
yeah. There's lots of them, but and it depends on whether you're talking about French or American Impressionism. But the market overall, I would say, Amanda, what you'd probably know better than me. It's a tiny bit soft right now. And so it's a good time to be buying impressionist paintings. Don't get me wrong, they're still expensive, but they're not like they were even 15 years ago. And in terms of where, at this point, I think some of the best impressionist paintings are coming through the auction houses these days, Christie's and Sotheby's.
And I think I'll just add, I'm an Americanist, so that's what I pay attention to. And I think one of the things you'll see in the exhibition is new attention being brought to different regions of American Impressionism, like the American Southwest and California. And so I think if you are someone who's interested in the field from a market point of view, that looking at the increasing popularity of the other regions, not just the New England Impressionists, American Impressionists, is it's a growing market at this point.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's the thing that your show really does brilliantly is kind of stretch the, I think we stretch the geography of American Impressionism as well as the chronology. And that, I think that was work that needed to be done.
And when you do that stretching chronologically and geographically, one of the things from my research interest point of view is you find how many more women artists are involved. I'm working right now on writing the labels for the exhibition today. I'm working on Evelyn McCormick, a California-based painter who was in Giverny and painting alongside the Theodores that we talked about today.
Really, really good point. There are a lot of women represented in this show.
Well, and you guys can look forward to the opening lecture of that show on January 24th. That is the American Impressionism show. And Amanda, I believe that you will be the one doing the lecture, if I'm not mistaken. So it's nice that everybody has gotten a nice little introduction to you. And I just have to thank everyone for being here today. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you for everybody who came.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in, Amanda, and thanks everyone for tuning in. It's great to see you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. It was great.
Lindley, did you see my email? I sent a follow-up about, you know, who Miss Andres Eggleston.
Yes, yes, I'm still looking into that.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Sounds interesting. Thanks a lot.